Nicati Arabaci, a name that strikes fear into the hearts of those who know him. From the bustling red light districts of Germany to the hidden underworld of Turkey, Arabaci has built a shadow empire worth millions. But his wealth wasn't made through legitimate businesses. It was built on the backs of vulnerable women trapped in his web of human trafficking and exploitation. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on the secretive world of Nicati Arabaci's brothels, a hidden empire fueled by coercion, violence, and ruthless control. This is the story of how one man turned human suffering into a thriving criminal business. Born on February 14, 1972, in Cologne, Germany, Nicati Arabaci grew up in a tough immigrant neighborhood. As the son of Turkish immigrants, he quickly learned that survival meant being tougher than the rest. By his teenage years, Arabaci was already making a name for himself as a streetwise hustler. But Arabaci wasn't interested in staying small-time. By the 1990s, he had moved from petty crime to organized operations. His ambitions grew, and so did his criminal network. But it wasn't drugs or guns that caught his interest. It was the hidden, lucrative world of brothels and human trafficking. What if I told you that Arabaci's empire wasn't just about making money? It was about control, about breaking people down to build himself up. And soon he would find his true calling in the dark corners of Europe's nightlife. By the early 2000s, Necati Arabaci had cemented himself as a powerful figure in Cologne's nightlife and red light district. But unlike other crime bosses, Arabaci's operations were far more sophisticated and brutal. To him, brothels were not just places of business. They were factories built on control, coercion, and profit. One of Arabaci's first steps in taking control was securing dominance over the bouncer scene in Cologne's Kölner Ringe district. This area, notorious for its clubs, bars, and brothels, was the perfect location for Arabaci to begin establishing his empire. By controlling the bouncers, he controlled access, and access meant power. But this was just the beginning. Arabaci had larger plans. He began purchasing and running high-end brothels across the Rhine-Ruhr region, including several in Cologne and later Augsburg. For Arabaci, these brothels were profitable fronts for a much darker enterprise: human trafficking. What if I told you that Arabaci's brothels were far from glamorous? Behind the glitzy exterior was a network of coercion where young women were recruited, controlled, and exploited, all to fuel Arabaci's empire. Arabaci's recruitment tactics were as ruthless as his operations. Young women from Eastern Europe were lured with promises of legitimate work, jobs as waitresses, bartenders, or dancers in Germany's bustling nightlife. But once they arrived, the truth was far darker. Arabaci's enforcers would take their passports, cut off communication, and force them into sex work. These women quickly realized they were trapped. Without identification, without support, and in a foreign country, they had nowhere to turn. Arabaci's network knew how to instill fear, using threats of violence not only against the women, but also against their families back home. Imagine finding yourself thousands of miles from home, surrounded by strangers, with no hope of escape. What if I told you that for these women, this nightmare became their daily reality? Inside the brothels, the women were under constant surveillance. Arabaci's enforcers patrolled the halls, ensuring that no one tried to escape or speak out. The women were forced to work long hours, seeing clients back to back, with little rest. They were treated as commodities, their earnings funneled straight into Arabaci's pockets. But Arabaci's methods went even further. To maintain control, he created a cycle of psychological manipulation. Women were given just enough hope to keep them from rebelling, small rewards if they obeyed, and brutal punishments if they resisted. They were told that if they complied, they could eventually earn their freedom. But this freedom was an illusion. What if I told you that this cycle of manipulation was designed to break them down, to make them believe that escape was impossible? Arabaci's brothels became notorious for their inhumane conditions. Women were not only forced to serve clients, but were also often subjected to degrading treatment by Arabaci's enforcers. Reports emerged of physical abuse, verbal threats, and even cases where women were locked up for days as punishment for defiance. Meanwhile, Arabaci enjoyed the profits of his growing empire. His brothels brought in enormous sums of money, with clients willing to pay a premium for the illusion of luxury. But behind every transaction, there was exploitation, suffering, and fear. As his network expanded, Arabaci also struck deals with other criminal organizations. By partnering with trafficking networks in Eastern Europe, he was able to secure a steady supply of women, further expanding his reach and influence. What if I told you that Arabaci's brothels weren't just local businesses? They were part of a vast, international trafficking operation that spanned continents? These partnerships ensured that Arabaci could maintain control and increase his influence. Women were treated as disposable commodities, replaced as needed, and moved from one location to another to avoid suspicion from authorities. Through intimidation, violence, and manipulation, Arabaci created an efficient system that made escape nearly impossible. For these women, life in Arabaci's brothels was a nightmare with no end in sight. But for Arabaci, this was business as usual. Every woman was a source of revenue, and every transaction a step further in building his empire. Arabaci's most notorious establishment was the Colosseum brothel in Augsburg. To the outside world, it was a high-end club catering to the wealthy. But behind the luxurious facade, it was a place of suffering for the women trapped inside. The Colosseum was more than just a brothel. It was the crown jewel of Arabaci's empire. What if I told you that the real business wasn't happening on the ground floor, but in the hidden back rooms? Rooms where deals were made and lives were destroyed. Arabaci's brothels were a place where anything could be bought for a price. Drugs, weapons, and even people were exchanged behind closed doors. His ability to manage this empire while evading authorities made him a powerful figure in Germany's underworld. But in 2002, German authorities finally caught up with Arabaci. After months of surveillance, police raided his properties, uncovering evidence of human trafficking, forced prostitution, and racketeering. The raid led to the arrest of Arabaci and several members of his gang. The trial was a media sensation. Arabaci was charged with multiple counts of pimping, human trafficking, extortion, and assault. Despite his efforts to maintain control, the evidence against him was overwhelming. But what if I told you that even prison couldn't stop him? That Arabaci managed to run his brothels from behind bars, using his loyal enforcers on the outside? Arabaci was sentenced to 9 years in prison, but even while incarcerated, he allegedly continued to control his empire, keeping the profits flowing. Nicati Arabaci's story is one of power, ruthlessness, and unrelenting ambition. His empire, built on human suffering, remains a testament to the dark side of organized crime. As authorities continue their fight, the question remains, how do you dismantle an empire that thrives in the shadows? Turn on the notification bell so that you are the first to enjoy the most compelling crime documentaries. If you enjoyed this video, then click here for another video delving into the inner world of the world's most notorious criminal organizations.